Well, we're just about the final one of these life on the radio stories that I'm telling for the 30 days of March 2022, my 50th year in broadcasting. And those of you who know me have probably been waiting for me to tell this story, and that is the story of the 1992 LA riots, a dark moment and in history, and certainly for me. And the one thing about it is I'm not going to end on this. This will be for the 30th day. The 31st day, which I'll do one more short one after this. And that'll be sort of a compilation of different things that I haven't had a chance to talk about that really didn't deserve a full episode, but just little tidbits and stuff to leave it on a brighter and happier note. But I cannot deny that one of the biggest events in my life certainly took place on April 29, 1992. I was assigned by both NBC and UPI, and how we got there to be working for two different agencies at the same time is neither here nor there. But I was full-time for UPI in transition and hired as a stringer for NBC Radio. And my assignment was to cover the react to the verdicts in the Rodney King trial when the four police officers were charged with various crimes in the beating of Rodney King. That took place in Simi Valley, as everyone knows, and I was living at the time in the San Fernando Valley. And I was at home watching for the verdicts to come down, prepared to go to what was then called South Central Los Angeles. It's now called South LA. And that was my job, was to go down there and react to the riots, file that, and then cover or get reaction to the verdicts, because we didn't know there was going to be a riot. We expected violence to happen at some point. We were hoping it wouldn't, but we did expect it. And so I was waiting for the verdicts to come down. Meanwhile, my children came home from school and the verdicts came down. I gathered my stuff together and headed out the door. I got to my car, and I was driving a little brown Mitsubishi Tredia at the time. And I got to my car, opened the trunk, put my gear in, my go bag, which we called it, with multiple tape recorders and cords and microphones and whatever we needed. And I had in my trunk, I had in the car, I had about a 6-7 inch long Navy knife, U.S. Navy knife, which had been given to me years ago by a friend of my father. And he just gave it to me as a gift, and it was used and everything, and I kept it all those years. And it was not sharp. You'd had to heat it up to cut through butter, but it was still a knife. It was a large knife, and it was in the trunk of my car and in a leather sheath. I still have that knife today. And so I thought, I probably should stop at the ATM and get a few bucks, because it's probably going to be a long night. I'll probably have to stop at a McDonald's or something just to get some burgers and just keep me going. So I went down to the ATM, stopped, got $20, and that's significant, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. Got in my car and drove down on my way to South Central Los Angeles. Stopped at a barber shop on the way. I'd always heard, I used to joke, my father used to tell me that if you want to get the pulse of a community, stop at a barber shop. People are there, they're sitting, they're talking about the weather, they're talking about whatever, but it's usually 4, 5, 6 people. And I stopped at a barber shop and I interviewed a bunch of people there. It was really good. I pulled over, I filed that tape to NBC Radio. I went further down into Los Angeles, and as I got on the edge of South Central, I stopped at another place, and it was a strip mall type place. Did some interviews there, put together some pieces, and asked a man who had a business there if I could use his phone, because we didn't have cell phones. And he said, sure, and he let me use it, and I filed to UPI Radio. Then I started heading more towards South Central, and I'm listening on the radio, and my good friend, Pete Demetrio, who was with KFWB at the time, and Pete hates that I tell this story because he feels responsible for me getting beat up. But we're good friends, have been for a long time. We worked together at another radio station at KNX. And so I heard him file a report from the scene of Florence and Normandy, and describing what was happening there and saying that if there's going to be a flashpoint, it's going to be here, Florence and Normandy. Well, you say flashpoint to a news guy, and that's where the story is. That's where you have to go. And so I called the desk, and then we got Steve Futterman called me, who was the NBC correspondent at the time, and we all talked about, because my job at that point, they wanted me to go along with Steve to the AME church and Chip Murray's church. And that was the center and the pulse of the community at that time. And that's where Chief Gates was going to be, and Mayor Bradley. And they were going to be there with Chip Murray, the Reverend, there, and call for calm and call for peace. Well, we only needed one person to go there, and Futterman was going to go there. And I said, I think I should go to Florence and Normandy. And the desk asked, do you feel safe going there? And I said, sure I do. I was the first white guy on an all-black baseball team that played down here. We played games in Pacoima, and I jumped to another team down here, and I was one of the first white guys on that team. We played at Manchester Park, which is in the next step over from Watts, where we had the Watts riots back in the 60s. And they said, okay, as long as you feel safe, go ahead. Of course, I figured that little press pass that said UPI and LAPD would help me out a little bit. Now, I was dressed in jeans, blue jeans, a blue windbreaker, and a blue UPI baseball cap. It said UPI radio on it. But, if you looked at me, I probably looked like a cop, undercover. I may have. I mean, I certainly probably didn't look like your typical reporter, and I certainly didn't look like I belonged there. It was almost 100% black community, and I'm white. So I drove down there. I fully expected to see yellow police tape. I didn't. But what I saw was people in the middle of the intersection and cars getting hit with rocks and bottles. I saw people stealing. I saw people looting. And I said, okay, I think I'm here a little bit too early. Where are the police? They're probably on the other side of the intersection. What I didn't know was at that point, the police had been pulled out for their own safety, and Chief Gates had called them out. They ran. They did. And what had happened was, and I said this before, and I'll say it again, and I've said it on previous anniversary shows that I was invited to be on for documentaries and things like that, that the euphoria that struck the community when the police were perceived as running, they ran from the scene and left, was victory for that community. They had not won a victory. They'd lost where they felt they legitimately should have won in court. The police officers, the verdict were let scot-free, nothing. And that was a loss and big disappointment. And the feeling, once again, black community gets beaten by cops and white cops, and nothing happens. And now the police ran from this intersection area, and now that seemed like a victory to these folks that they hadn't won 2 hours earlier. And a euphoria broke out. I mean, people were dancing in the streets, but a few bad apples were doing the worst. They started looting and breaking and ravaging, and there were a lot of good people there who were just standing around watching. But there was a lot of bad people doing bad things, and a lot of good people doing bad things that they normally wouldn't do if they hadn't got caught up in the moment of this, what turned out to be a riot. Well, I'm seeing this coming in, and the first thing I did was I'm looking for a payphone, because I got to be able to call the desk. And I saw a stand-up payphone on the sidewalk to my left. What I did was I did a U-turn in the middle of the street and faced my car, put my car right in front of that payphone a few feet away, but also facing out of the intersection, because if I needed to get out of there in a hurry, I didn't want to have to go through the intersection, because could have been deadly. I wanted to go the other way. And so I immediately went to the phone, put my dime in, called collect to the desk, and I'll use the vernacular here. Bob Jones, who I worked with at UPI as well, I called the NBC desk, And Bob Jones answered, and I said, "It's Bob Brill. Shut the fuck up. Start rolling tape. I'm in the middle of a riot." Bob did his credit, said, "Hang on just a second." Boom, started the tape rolling. Go, go, go. And I just started describing what I was seeing. I remember seeing a black car coming through the intersection with a black driver, and I don't remember the woman who was with him, whether she was white or black, getting blasted with rocks and bottles as they came through the intersection, almost came up over the curb to where I was, swerved, and a guy in a white van getting pulled out and getting beat up. A guy came running by me toward the intersection saying, "I'm going to get me a TV set." I saw another guy running back away from Tom's Liquor with a case of beer on his shoulders and just running away. They were stealing anything they could. I mean, it had become a full riot. And then Reginald Denny, a truck driver, driving for a company called, I believe it was Transmixed or Transit Mixed, came into the intersection and just minding his own business, trying to get through. He should have kept going. He made the mistake, in his case, of stopping when people were in front of him. The people would have moved, but he stopped. And as soon as he stopped, they jumped up on the cab, opened the cab door, and pulled him out. And there were three guys in particular. There was Anton Williamson, Damian Williams, who they called Football, and another guy's name I don't remember off the top of my head, who was a former Marine, who later got convicted but got time served, later started a business, had a limousine business, and went on. Damian Williams was probably the lead instigator in what was happening at the time, along with Anton. And they just pulled this guy, Reginald Denny, who was a pretty husky white truck driver with long hair, out of that cab and just started beating him, doing everything they could. They beat him with anything that was handy. At one point, they came over with a large plaster Paris, looked like a lawn ornament, probably 40 pounds, came over, and while he was laying on the ground, smashed it over his head. At one point, he was on his knees, bloodied, covered with blood, white t-shirt ripped. He was wearing white pants. And I couldn't tell whether he was man or woman. I really couldn't. And that's how badly it was. He had long hair. And of course, at that time, we were starting to get female truck drivers. So it would have been certainly feasible. And Williams ran up as he was on his knees, hands raised to the sky. "Please help me." Williams ran up, jumped up in the air, and gave a karate kick to the head. And while he was laying there, somebody else came over and picked his pocket, of all things. And this went on. It seemed like forever, but it was probably about 5-6 minutes, which he should have been dead by that point. He wasn't. He had massive surgeries and severe injuries for the rest of his life. We haven't heard from him in a while. He moved to Arizona at one point, became a mechanic. But what went on there was just horrible. Man's inhumanity to man was just on display in multitudes. It was just terrible, absolutely terrible. And I was there describing this, and a man came by me, started approaching me, very nicely dressed. I remember he had a black Hawaiian type shirt on, and looked at me and said, "What the hell are you doing here?" Now, I had been very careful to stay behind and try to be as incognito as I could behind that phone booth. It wasn't a big booth like a Superman would change clothes in, but it was more of those stand-ups where Superman couldn't change his clothes in the original Superman movie. But I was trying to be incognito. I was leaning against a chain link fence there, and I had my tape recorder on top of the phone booth and a microphone in my hand and the phone in my hand. And when he said that, I moved out from behind the phone booth, which I should never have done. And I had, got off my guard and just said, "I'm a news reporter, and I'm just doing my job. And I'm going to play that 35 seconds of audio that happened next, right about here. You've heard it probably 100 times. I know I have. And I don't have a problem with it. It's not, at all. But what happened next was, as I answered this guy, he looked past me over what would be my right shoulder. And thank the good Lord that I wasn't quicker. If this had been 20 years earlier, I might have been much quicker. I might have turned around to see what he was looking at, but I didn't have time. And what happened was the person behind me hit me on the side of the head with a full beer bottle, one of those 64-ounce things, and knocked me down. But if I had been quick enough to turn around, I'd have got that right in the face and might have been blinded, bought glass in my eyes, cut up all over my face. All sorts of things could happen. Fortunately, that didn't happen. The blow sent me to the ground. And then instinctively, being in radio, I know where my bread and butter is, I covered my mouth with both hands. And they either started kicking me or punching me. I think it might have been both for the next however many seconds it lasted, 20 seconds, whatever, which was more than enough as far as I was concerned. And you can hear me screaming on the tape, saying, okay, stop, I'm fine. And I'll play that for you here.
The man is up now. His clothes are torn. He's still bleeding all over the place. He's trying to get back into his truck. He is getting back into his truck. It's a transit mixed truck. And he's white. He's trying to get out, trying to drive through this intersection now. I hope he has enough power on his own to just get out of the area. I'm a news reporter. Now I see smoke. Something, can't tell. Oh, God! No! No! Okay! That's wild! Okay!
And when it stopped, the first thing I did is I looked at my glasses. They were gone. I noticed my tape recorder was gone. I still had the microphone in my hand, and the phone was dangling. And I grabbed the phone, and I asked Bob Jones on the other line, and I ended the line. I said, "Did you get that?" I had at least the good sense to know. Now I was in the story. I want to make sure, they had it. They said yes. I said, well, I just had the shit beat out of me. I'm going to go to the hospital. And they said, go, 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 go. I turned around, made sure I had what I came with, and I didn't, but I had what I had. Started to go back to my car. And the first thing I thought I would do would be to put my microphone instinctively in the trunk. Then I realized my go bag was in there, and on top of my go bag was that large knife. Didn't want to go there. And off to my right, there's someone. I assume he was the person that beat me. I don't know. I never saw him. Approaching me and said, "Give me your wallet." And I said, "No." And he said, "Give me your wallet, motherfucker." And I said, "No, I'm not giving my wallet." I remembered I had the $20. Reached in my pocket. I said, "This is all I've got. It's $20 cash. Take it." He goes, he took it. I said, "No, motherfucker, I want your wallet." And I said, "You're not going to get it." And I started to move toward the driver's door. And two things happened. Number one, it came to my mind why I wouldn't give him the wallet. And the things you think about when your life's on the line, the stupidity sometimes, or the whatever. I collect Bill Mazeroski baseball cards. That's really one of the few things I collect. I have the biggest Mazeroski collection in the world. At least I think I do. And my son, Bobby, my oldest son, had made a list of all the Bill Mazeroski cards I did not have. He made it about 2 weeks earlier, and he gave me that list, and that list was in my wallet. I was not going to give up my wallet because I did not want to give up that list. I knew about the credit cards and the driver's license and all that stuff, but The list was what was on my mind. And the second thing was, when I started to go to the car, I realized that my right thumb was broken. And I also had a cracked skull. I had scratches and cuts and abrasions all over my neck and head, and forehead was bleeding. And but my thumb was smashed. My right thumb was smashed. I could not use it. So I took the key to my car and I put it between my second and third fingers, stuck it in the lock, turned it, and got in the car. I was driving a stick, and I knew, because there was a crowd gathering starting to come toward me, and I knew that as soon as I moved that car forward, I was going to get pelted with rocks and bottles. I knew it was going to happen. And out of the right corner of the right side of the car, out of the corner of my eye, I saw this guy who had demanded my wallet have a big rock. And he was winding up like he was going to throw it toward my car, like a pitcher would. And as I started to move, that rock exploded through my right rear window and landed in the back seat. And I have to do this. I have to get up to do it, because I didn't think ahead of time. This is the rock. If you're watching on video, this is the rock. I still have it. It landed in my back seat, and it stayed there. And being an historian, I kept it. And I've kept it 30 years now, as of this taping. And so the window's broken, and as I'm moving forward, as I expected, rocks and bottles are now pelting and landing on my window. And fortunately, I was in motion, so that metal strip above the windshield is where most of it hit. But still, I couldn't see anything. My glasses were gone, and there was beer all over my windshield. Thank the good Lord that there was nobody in front of me, because I wasn't stopping. I was moving out. And if they were in front of me, they moved very quickly. And I jammed on down the street and got out of there as fast as I could. It's the last I saw of Florence and Normandy for that time. I got about 3/4 of a mile away, and I saw a donut shop, and with a payphone. I pulled over, and there was 4 old men sitting at the picnic table outside the donut shop. He's kind of looked at me. Obviously, I was, not in my right physical shape. I got out, and I headed to the payphone. And I said, they looked at me, and I looked at them, and I said, there's a riot going on down the street. And they said, oh, yeah, we wondered about the helicopters overhead. Well, that was a normal occurrence. There were all these helicopters overhead in South Central, police helicopters. But there were more this time over that intersection. Bob Turr, who's now Zoe Turr, his helicopter was over there for one of the TV stations, and as well as others, and as well as police helicopters. So I got to the desk, or I got to the phone, I called the desk, and they said, go to the hospital, just go. So I drove to, I believe it was Daniel Freeman at the time. It's no longer Daniel Freeman. And I pulled in to the emergency area. And as I was getting out of my car, Reginald Denny's truck, driven by a guy named Bobby Greenwood, I think it was Bobby Greenwood, who had helped him. He got in the cab and drove, he was a truck driver, drove to the hospital as well. And they were pulling into the driveway as I was going into the ER. I got into the ER, nurses and everything are coming toward me. And I said, look, I'm beat up and everything, but the man in that truck outside that's coming in was tragically beaten up. Need to get to him. So they ran outside. I went in. Nurse had me sit in a chair. And to my right, sitting next to me, was a Korean woman who had been attacked, and a Black LA Times reporter. And he explained that at some point, he realized that being a journalist wasn't as important as being a human being. He helped this woman, got her to the hospital, was staying there with her until she got into the hospital and could get taken care of. 25 years later, I'm doing an interview, and Pete Demetrio is with me. And Pete mentions this too. Pete is the one that they approached to find out where the local hospital was, and he sent them to Daniel Freeman, to where I was, and then we met right there. So talk about small world and things going round and round. It does happen. the administrator came up to me while I was sitting there and said, asked me my name and stuff, and said, well, what were you doing there? And I said, I'm a reporter. I was, reporting to, my agencies. He goes, you were working? And I said, yes. He goes, oh, good, we'll get paid, which meant there would be workers' comp and that kind of stuff and insurance, because Daniel Freeman was well known for mainly being Friday, Saturday night, gunshot wounds, stabbings, that kind of stuff. Nobody got paid. And, there was a trauma center. So they fast tracked me, put me in a room, and they kept coming in with a phone and saying, there's a phone call, phone call, phone call. And so my wife and kids, I ended up calling. I called my desk, obviously. And I got calls. My friend Brian Bland of AP Radio Los Angeles called me and did an interview with me and said, well, my friend, you did your job too well. There was no tape there, was there? And I didn't know. UPI called me. I wanted a description of what happened. I talked to the folks at NBC, and before long, they took care of me, cleaned me up, and sent me on my way. I did an interview with Fox News as I left the hospital. And the next few days, well, first of all, the first thing that happened after that, I was off the story. I was on workers' comp. So I didn't get to cover any of the rest of the riots. So that was my initiation and over with. Spent some time, a couple of weeks off before I went back to work. Went to doctors and a physical therapist, still have problems with the neck. I brought on early arthritis, and I still have pain in my neck, always probably will, from that incident. But outside of that, my thumb is, smashed. It healed, but it's different and it hurts occasionally. So I still, 30 years later, still suffer from some injuries from that. We went to file a lawsuit. I had a lawyer, wanted to file a lawsuit, the same one Reginald Denny filed. Neither of us won. His didn't win. We never served ours because of what happened with a couple of other federal cases. We filed a civil rights case, and it wasn't going to go anywhere, so we chose not to file it. So workers' comp took care of me in a small amount, but the phones rang for the next few days like crazy. I did a few interviews weeks after that. Even people were calling to talk to me. I was on a current affair the very next day. And Nora O'Donnell was the host, now CBS News anchor, Evening News. And they had a reporter from Britain who interviewed me. We had to laugh because we felt the funny thing was he opened the story as Bob Brill's a big city reporter, which kind of made me laugh. And us. One of the things that happened at almost the exact time of the beating was occurring, my wife at the time and family, and I guess some friends were there wondering, what happened, where I was. They hadn't heard from me. And they formed a prayer circle in front of the TV and were praying for me just about the same time that I was getting beaten. And friends from our church and were doing the same. And it was a wild time. I had a friend from Europe who used to be here in LA as a reporter, said, yeah, that LAPD press pass really took care of him, huh? And but it was one of those times that you never forget. And every 5-10 years, whenever there's an anniversary, some news media agency calls me. CNN most recently, they're doing a documentary. And so it was, some people would say it's my 15 minutes of fame. I hope that I'm remembered for more than that. And the bad thing was I reported there for about 14 minutes. All that survived is 35 seconds. And all the rest went on the cutting room floor, so to speak. And all the really good reporting I did will never get heard. Never, because it wasn't live. It was live to tape. And all that tape was gone except the iconic 35 seconds that people tell me is some of the best radio sound they've ever heard. Well, I guess it took me getting the crap beat out of me to have the best sound the radio ever heard. It was much better, I'm sure, in the history of radio. But it was a time with, like I said, I'll never forget. And I think about anything else that I wanted to say about that. And it was just a moment. My family was very supportive, and we moved on from it, and went back to work at UPI and until the mid 90s, and I moved on from there. But that was my claim to fame, so to speak, being put into the world by almost getting taken out of it. The guy who beat me up, or people who beat me up, I don't know. They could walk up to me today and say they were the person, and I wouldn't know. I couldn't say. People ask me if I'm angry. No, I can't say I ever really was. I just basically, I did my job the best I could. I got caught a little bit off guard, and that's when it happened. I guess the lesson is always be aware of your surroundings. Never, ever forget that if you're in a very, very dangerous situation. You can't let your guard down for a moment. Not one moment. I did for a total of about 3 seconds. And that's when my near tragedy came. Could have been killed, could have been maimed for life, could have certainly been disfigured or blinded or whatever. I had a broken eardrum, punctured eardrum from that. It all healed. But that's the lesson from it. So this is the 30 days, and I said I'd do 31, and the next episode will be the final episode of Life on the Radio, and it's going to be a little compilation of just some more fun, lighter things that I want to talk about that happened in my career. So thanks for sticking with me on them. There you have the whole story, and we'll see you next time.